Hi, Simone. It's good to have you today.
Thank you. It's really good to be here with you.
And today we have one of our newest speakers that I have the honor and pleasure of working with, Simone Ahuja, who has done phenomenal work in the space of intrapreneurship, and that we'll learn more about today. But what I'm really excited is that, and you and I talked about that, Simone, is we're really at an intersection where we need people to be more creative and to speak up and be entrepreneurs so that the systems can change. That really is the only way. And so, yeah, let's go there.
Let's go there. I love it. Thank you, Ingrid. I appreciate it. And I appreciate your enthusiasm about entrepreneurship. I really think that entrepreneurship, let me first start by defining it.
Yeah.
Entrepreneurship, as you can imagine, intra and preneurship sounds like entrepreneur, but it's really internal entrepreneur. So how do you harness the creativity and invite your employees to use their own knowledge, their insights, their creativity so that they can be motivated and they can help solve problems. So it's not just the R&D lab, or it's not just the people with the big titles or the big budgets. It's everyone all over the organization. So you can imagine why that would be helpful both to organizations, but also who else does an organization serve? Your people. I mean, without people who are happy and whole and satisfied, you're not going to have a great organization. We all know that. That's why we talk about culture so much. And that's what I have seen is the thing about entrepreneurship I probably didn't know 10 or 15 years ago when I first started thinking about innovation and then later entrepreneurship. But entrepreneurship is a way to get to better problem solving and adding more value. But it's also a way to help people feel really connected and really engaged and feel like they are part of a solution and not just a mission statement that sounds good, but it feels so far away. I can't feel it on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I resonate with that term and what it represents so much because I feel that my first jobs, it is within me to be an entrepreneur, and I just couldn't be that. And there wasn't this space for that, and there wasn't the consciousness from the leaders to spot that and
Mm.
to reinforce that, and to allow for that to happen. And so that's why today I think it's more important than ever because leaders' jobs are to maximize people's potential. And so, anyways, let's go to your journey.
You know what? Let me just share something because I hear what you're saying, Ingrid. And what's really interesting is when I was doing my research for my second book, Disrupt It Yourself, one of the things that I learned that was very clear is that intrapreneurs who can add a ton of value to an organization, the ones that are in there already trying to solve problems, not okay with the status quo. They're not trying to break things just for the sake of it. They're trying to advance existing organizational goals, but
Mm,
maybe in a different way. Or maybe they see something that's an opportunity that gets you to a goal, but it's not something that was in an existing objective. It's not listed as such. Those people, if they're not supported, well, let's ask you, what happened to you when you weren't
well, you
supported?
leave, of course.
You
You
leave.
leave.
You
Yeah,
lose. So this is
you can't stay.
it's important that you said that because what I think organizations don't realize the risk is if you don't support your entrepreneurs, the people who are going to add this tremendous value, they will leave. That's it. And there is a big, I talk to senior leaders every day, and talent pool is a big part of the conversation. We have attrition, we have an engagement issue. So supporting the entrepreneurs is a way to do it.
Yeah, but Simone, talk to me about your journey and very, long story short, I mean, you've done some phenomenal work. What I really, I would say, admire about your work is the way that you went back to your roots and like really tried to see what people were doing with a lack of resources that had a lack of resources. And sometimes it's just going back to our roots and seeing. So talk to me about that experience and then
Yeah,
obviously what led to what you're doing now.
yeah, certainly. It was really, let's see, what we call a webbed path today. I think back when I started, it might have been called a little confused, candidly. People were like, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? And that is okay. I think we've all got to figure it out now, at least for this part of the journey. We'll have to do more work in the future. But I started my professional journey, my career as a dentist. So I went to dental school. I practiced full time for about a year, and I knew about halfway through dental school that wasn't for me. I actually really love science and healthcare, and I love, helping people. But maybe I didn't do the quick thinking about, you can't really talk with people as much as I would have liked to in dentistry because your hands are in their mouth. And so I started to explore other things like improvisational comedy and theater and documentary filmmaking. And then while I was in India, actually, I got a terrible case of typhoid, which manifested in the US. Unfortunately, if it had manifested in India, I think that they would have figured out more quickly what was the problem. But here, it took a while in Minneapolis. They were like, we haven't had a case of typhoid here for years. Can you just tell us how that happened? And I ended up being hospitalized for 10 days. And I think that was one of those moments where people talk about where you're like, everything becomes crystal clear, because by the end of it, I was so sick. I lost like 25 pounds in 10 days. I felt weak. I did not, it was just a very difficult time. And I just remember thinking when I came out of it, well, I don't have time. Luckily, I was very young. I didn't have time. I felt like, okay, I don't have time to live something that isn't very purposeful. And don't get me wrong, so I ended up continuing to work more in sliding scale clinics where people didn't have access or couldn't afford dentistry. So I wanted to put that skill to a good use, but just a different way than private practice. That felt better to me while I was exploring all these other things. So one of those things was filmmaking. I was making documentary films about India. That is where my family is from. My dad is from Punjab, which is in northern India, a very spirited group of people. I like to call them the party people of India. I definitely have that in me. And then my mom is from Kashmir, so extreme northern India, where people might know it for the Himalayas.
Mm-hmm.
It's a beautiful place in India. And so that's where they're from. And we actually didn't travel back to India a lot when I was a kid, but I was really curious about India growing older. So I made the documentary series, the first one about how India is changing. And then Best Buy actually sponsored a second series of TV shows that we were going to put onto PBS. So they can't dictate that editorial, content, but they wanted to support it. And the sort of the premise was, how do people solve problems, even if they have severe resource constraints, right? Mm-hmm. So there are plenty of wealthy people in India. And as we know, of course, there's a lot of poverty too, right? A growing middle class for sure, but a lot of poverty. And so what we learned is that we traveled all around the country, and we would visit a lot of grassroots entrepreneurs and even corporate leaders too, but thinking about how do people who grow up in these environments solve really big problems, not just little micro problems, like problems in creating accessible healthcare, creating financial access, and so on. And what I learned is that there is an approach to doing that. People don't just throw in the towel. And it starts with this mindset. And what I learned was this word called Jugaad. And Jugaad is like an improvised, it's a leveraging your ingenuity. It's a creative using the resources you have in the moment to solve the problem at hand. It's not worried about the bells and whistles, but it is a way to get into action. And it's really empowering. And I saw that in so many places. I saw that and it starts with a mindset. So just to share a quick example, when I was in India doing this research on the ground for almost a year, I had an India-based team and a US-based team, very talented, both of them. What I noticed is that the India-based team, if we ran into a problem, they would always say, well, let's do some Jugaad. We'll do some Jugaad. And I was like, we'll just figure it out. So when we were in the desert, in the Rann of Kutch, studying how salt farmers were breaking out of a cycle of poverty through creation of mills and ways to create energy that would help them increase their production so they weren't poor generationally. It was really remarkable, but it was scary because we were out in the middle of the desert and our GPS was an old man with a very long white beard. There was no GPS in the desert way out where we were. And it was strange because it was like being on the sea where you can't see land, except we could see flat desert and nothing else. And we were running out of gas. We were running out of
Oh my goodness.
we were running out of everything. And I was saying, let's go back, let's go back. And and we needed actually something like a steady camp. So we were on this craggy ground and we couldn't get the shots that we needed. But I was like, we are really pushing it. We have to go get out of here. I mean, we could literally perish right here. Plus, of course, I could not understand the gentleman who was helping show us around. It was pretty dramatic, at least on my end. And so I wanted to pull the plug, but my team in India was like, no, we'll do some Jugaad. We'll do some Jugaad. And they took what we had in the van. We had some like PVC pipe and some twine, and they put a pillow on it, and they put the camera on there, and they just sort of created this makeshift steady cam. And we got the shot. It wasn't perfect, but it was good enough to keep going. And it saved us a lot of time and money later. We would have had a huge budget loss. It would have upset our schedule and so on. And I really had to reflect on that and think, why did I just had this really resource rich response, which is like, well, if we don't have all the things, we have to give up. So that huge in terms of what I learned. So all of this to say is that Jugaad, I ended up working with another person on this TV series, and we started writing about this on the Harvard Business Review. And somebody just said, hey, do you want to write a book about this? And we said, yeah, that sounds great. It was not just because it was a book, but I think because what I realized is that approach was so fundamentally different than what I learned here in the US. I had a great education in the health sciences. I really value it. And what I know is there's a really important place for this type of creative, agile thinking. And I think back then, so this is now 2008, 2009, this research started. So many people might not even remember the financial crisis, but when we first wrote about Jugaad and what the value of Jugaad innovation is, so it was like we codified it a bit. We were like, okay, people are actually doing this in a step-by-step way. Here's what it looks like. The responses were things like, what are we going to learn from these third world countries?
My gosh, so much.
Oh, this was real. This is back when you could actually blog and put your comments on things.
Those were the trolls. Comments.
Yeah, they were real, and this was a very common question. It was like I even had one chief marketing officer of a Fortune 50 say to me when we were talking about this. He said, "Look in our parking lot. What scarcity do we have?" And he was referring to all the big cars out there. Financial crisis happens. You can imagine who calls us back. Like, how do you do this more with? How do you actually create more value with less resources? And it became a much more widely accepted approach. Now, I think when I was talking to the CFO of another very large organization, he was pretty excited. He was like, "I am more with less. This is great." I said, "It is more with less." And the power of that is it creates accessibility, right? So if you don't have to have the big title, and if you don't have to have the big budget, it means by definition, more people will be involved in problem solving and adding new value, which is really what innovation is, right? That's better for everyone. But it's not about the big squeeze. It's not about squeezing the last drop out of everyone till they deliver so much productivity. There's just nothing else in them. And that's not what Jugaad is. It's about simplicity. What I really learned from these Jugaad innovators was how they created simplicity in their product design, in their models, in their systems, by being very empathetic. And I think, what's really interesting about that to me now is I often will say simplicity is the new empathy, because what I have observed is, I think with increasing information coming at us all the time, we've all felt sort of overwhelmed, right? We've all felt like there's too much. And post-pandemic, we can't pretend that everything's okay now. If I think about what I do to be empathetic towards my clients, or when I give a keynote, or when we deliver workshops, or even when I create a message for a CEO, it's as simple as it can be. That is the new empathy, so that I can take it in, I can understand it, I won't feel overwhelmed after
Mhm.
looking at it or taking it in. Does that make sense?
I love it. Yeah. And I just wrote it down, simplicity. I don't know if I told you it was my theme 2 years ago. It was at the center of my work of simplifying and embodying simplicity. And then that year, later in the year, I got a huge project from a company called Simplicity. And then
Oh,
you say it, like it's just, it really is something I think all of us need to learn how to embody.
well, what did you learn? I'm curious. So, what was the calculus sort of with that body of research?
Yeah, I think for me, simplicity. So the first year was really just about understanding how I simplify how I work. Because what happened was that I was doing a lot of my entrepreneurship work out of impulse. Everything was out of impulse. Like I would just think of something and do it. There was no space for my intuition to come in or any space in between to
Mm,
even feel if this was the right thing or not. And
mm.
so what happened was my life was chaotic because there was no, you know, actual like I mean everything was, even the way that I was running with my clients, like it was just, there's no structure to it. I mean there was, but it wasn't simple, you know? And so I had to literally start cutting everything that wasn't sustainable or that was made out of impulse and start to make processes and systems within my business that allowed for that intuition to have space so that I wouldn't. And now I have so many more clients, Simone. I mean, there's so much more going on. And like, I don't feel that. I mean, I could take a whole Wednesday off and go do pottery if I feel like it, I mean, there's no, because I'm living sustainably and I'm embodying simplicity.
I love this word you used, living sustainably. And I used to rail against process because I thought it was antithetical to creativity and
Mm,
innovation. I was like, well, that feels confining. What I have realized over time, I think, like you just said, is when we take the time
mm,
to first define what's important,
mhm.
then to create the systems and processes. They don't have to look like other people's,
No.
but should be repeatable and sustainable for you, that will support those values or those missions or those goals or whatever it is that's important to you, your
Mhm.
purpose. Then you can do the work that's fulfilling and do it in a way, like you say, so that you can take the time to, you know, put more energy into your energetic bank account. That's how I think about it a lot of times. I used to drain myself often by doing things, kind of
Yeah.
reinventing the wheel very often. And that is a really important point you make about simplicity, right? And that's what I learned from the Jugaad innovators in
Mm,
India is they would take these problems that they had and they would distill it down to its essence so that
mm,
they could stay laser focused on that. And they didn't worry about, well, what if we added this feature or what if we could
mm,
tweak it in this way? And that clarity is what allowed them to advance. They
mm.
were very closely connected to user need and make really good progress in spite of their really limited resources. And if I think about it, when I work at organizations all over the world, mostly in the US, but if I work at even in my, I'll just name some ones that are outlined in my book, but certainly some of the world's largest technology organizations. It could be a 3M or it could be a United Health. It could be Target.
Mm.
It could be so many organizations that we work with. The same problems exist everywhere, and
Yeah.
that is even the ones that we think of as being the most innovative. They're facing the same challenges, which is we're doing too many things.
Mhm.
We don't know how to rein them in. I mean, I'll give you a real example. I was working with a
Mm,
Fortune 10 organization, and I was working with one of their COEs to help them build a culture of innovation and learning. And one of the senior leaders came out of a senior leadership retreat, and she said, "I can't believe it. We came out of there with 500 priorities.
mm.
How are you going to function like that?" So obviously you can imagine the next thing we did as a team was really take those down. Priorities have to be very, very focused. If you don't do that, you'll be confused, your teams are confused, you don't know what's really important, and it creates this tremendous sense of overwhelm. And so that's what I love to do too. I think it's so interesting that you bring up this idea of processes and systems. I do this with organizations, whether it's a Google or a 3M, or whether it's arts organizations that I work with, or even in my own home. I love using really simple systems or frameworks. Like, I love to use a prioritization framework where we just look at three things. Okay, so it's, what is the impact this thing is going to have? How is it easy or hard? And are we interested? So it's impact.
Oh, I love that. That's so simple.
It's so simple. And then you rank it, scale of 1 to 10. And I've done this, again, with very large companies, and we just rank it, and it becomes very democratic. So people see this happen in real time. The numbers get calculated in real time, and it becomes a little bit more focused on, here are our top 3. Let's discuss these, as opposed to let's discuss all of these ideas that everybody had, which is really hard, right? So it just makes it simpler and more clear. Now we know where to dedicate our time, our energy, our financial resources, our people resources. That's going to create some space in my head so I don't feel like I'm doing everything. So
you cannot create. I mean, I love this simple exercise you just shared. And this is why when I came across your profile and we got connected, I was so excited, because I'm really seeing companies just drown in, and the newer generations don't want anything to do with that.
That's right.
Because they've had access to so much information, they've had to learn how to simplify and get what they need. And so I'm just seeing that the companies are in that space, and leaders of like really, but then they don't even have the time, which is crazy, of like taking things off and being like, is this even necessary, or questioning why this meeting is happening, or why they're doing what they, and so I'm seeing some companies start that initiative, but there's a lot of need to like have people in conversations and workshops and training so that we can start to simplify everything.
I think that it couldn't be more true. If I think about the number one problem that senior leaders have, and managers, and all actually individual leaders, personal leaders as well, there is a lack of time that's set aside for strategy and reflection. And that is the time that will give you better results. So, there's been a lot of conversation in the last year or two about, Mark Zuckerberg called last year the year of efficiency, which makes me recoil a little bit, because it's not to say that there isn't a place for efficiency. I think process does give you efficiency. At the same time, what I often find organizations doing is, because they're not taking that time to reflect, to strategize, to simplify, they're not being effective. So we're squeezing out the last drop of everything so we can get just a little more margin, and we can bump, we can please the analysts. And that is real. Like, that is a real need of organizations. They got to make their earnings. They have a responsibility to their shareholders, but they have a lot of other responsibilities too. And I think the leaders who I think are the most forward-looking are the ones who can be really clear, who are taking that time to really articulate their strategy clearly, to communicate it early and often, over and over and over and over again, to the point where people are like, yes, I get it. I understand what our strategy is. Because very rarely do I walk into an organization where everyone's like, yep, I get it. I know what our strategy is. It's very unusual. And then if we think about things like innovation, and we want to build a culture of innovation, we want motivated people. We want people to have agency, but we don't have a plan, right? So we don't have an innovation strategy that's connected to our core business strategy. That's kind of what I love about intrapreneurship, because, while I'm all for enterprise-wide transformation, I think that's really important. I also think it's a bit of a unicorn, maybe not a unicorn, but somewhere in there. It's not very common. An endangered species of corporate.
Yeah, that is a great way to put it.
It doesn't happen very often. That's pretty well studied. And what intrapreneurship does is it helps people understand how they do just that. So first, how do I really define a problem? And then how do I break it down into small pieces until it's something that I can actually address? Then how do I validate that to make sure that it's actually something that we know is a real problem, not something I thought about or we talked about inside the four walls of our organization, but a real problem that our users tell us is a problem. And then after that, how do we do solutioning so that we're coming up with solutions that are maybe better and completely different than we already had? And then thinking about, well, what is the value and how do we articulate value and so on, until you finally have to understand the needs of whoever you have to pitch to. It could be, pitching for funding, or it could be pitching to somebody in, UX who you need your buddy to drop a wireframe for you, or someone in financial modeling. In my house, it's often for children. I have to really think about their needs so that I can do anything that I ask them to do. But so that you can actually have this core set of what I think are fantastic leadership skills, so that you can feel agency, so you can feel really confident, so you know how to simplify and get things done. And that feeling of confidence and agency and having that skill set, that's what makes people feel engaged. That's what makes them stay in an organization. That's what drives sort of this like bottom up innovation. So I kind of think it's clearly I have drunk my own Kool-Aid. I genuinely believe this now after 15 years of this research, that it has that kind of value.
Well, value, and then also impact, and then also the right time. Like, it is the right time now to do that. And then we have AI, and we're seeing so many solutions of AI that can be used to simplify as well and take things off people's plates that shouldn't even be there. And so that's why I just love being connected to you, Simone, because I really do feel that now is the time, and I'm seeing it a lot with my clients too.
And likewise, I have to tell you, I really loved your post about kindness and not being hard, and softness, and the power of that is so important. And I think it is the right time because, like you said, a lot of people, especially new college grads, they don't want to work in large organizations, right? Something like 14% of them do. A lot of them are thinking about things like startups, or they want to start something on their own. So I think this is where I wonder, are the corporations really paying attention to this in the way they need to? Are they thinking of employees as a customer in a way? How do we really create engagement? I think intrapreneurship can be a really easy way to do that. Plus, it helps you build a leadership pipeline too, and it accelerates innovation. So I do think that this is the right time for it's not that you have to have a flat organization like a holacracy, but it's a flattened approach that appeals to everyone more than the old structure that was very hierarchical, very top down. It's not to say there's no leader or that somebody doesn't have the final word. We need guidance. It's just that people know how to move their way forward. They have the agency and they have a motivation to do it too.
And I even look at it from the perspective of, for like people having like DEI strategies and for things to actually work. I mean, you can't make anything work if people don't feel centered and they feel like their work is simplified and that they have the processes in place to be simple. And, like we, for example, with Noda, we built an entire back end for proposals and for managing our speakers. And it takes me about 2 seconds to send a proposal with profiles of speakers, which before it took so much time to like put together and, and send it. And so I'm always thinking of like, what are things that I could, automize or have, and make it work without me that would simplify the way that I work. And so that it also creates less stress and there's less, and my team, we all have such a flow. And I feel like companies are scared of that because maybe there's a little bit less control in that, but not, I don't know.
Well, I think that's exactly right. So I think that's one of the things that we do too, is we'll ask, managers to get into a session and personal leaders to get into a session and start thinking about how do you use AI and what I think, and automation. I'm just going to speak to AI and technology for a minute, because if we think about the massive number of Black and brown people in the US who still don't have broadband access, those numbers are still very, very high. Now, a lot of people are afraid of AI. There are massive issues and challenges in terms of policy and bias, and we have to be attentive to those. At the same time, we have to bring AI to everyone. We have to bring technology to everyone, because it could help leapfrog, it could help accelerate the pathway of people who are not the mainstream or haven't been the mainstream.
You know what I find it like call centers. I mean, people that work at, I mean, with a little bit of AI. I mean, we worked with this company and they had their people back to back. They literally had a 5-minute bathroom break. I mean, it was inhumane, you know?
It is. And you know what's really unfortunate about that is those people are frontline. I mean, that is your front line to your company, the first experience, oftentimes, the people they call when there are problems. And we did that with another large organization and ensure where we build a pipeline. So those people could take their inputs and could actually share them. What are the themes that we're hearing? What are people complaining about? And those insights were really important. And they felt great to know that their inputs were being utilized.
So powerful.
Easy to automate that now with transcripts. It's very, very easy. And I think the irony is that it doesn't have to be that hard. What we found was hard was getting interviews. So it was not that hard to get the interviews with the senior leaders. But when it came to, could we talk to people who are called, representatives, service representatives, we had to go through so many hoops because they're hourly employees instead of salaried employees. And it was really difficult. So there are all these barriers that get in the way of people who may be more typically historically marginalized communities, for example, to get their input to help them leverage the new technologies. And I think it's upon all of us, managers and leaders, need to really start thinking about, how do we bring that forward? How do we bring the technology forward? How do we help float all the boats, right? So that we can have better organizations, more growth for everyone.
Amen to that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, I mean, I feel like we've covered it, but you have some really phenomenal sessions, and I'm just going to mention them, and then you can talk a little bit about them, to those that are listening, and that are in corporate spaces that are, like hearing our conversation, being like, yeah, you're right. We need this. We need to simplify. We need to figure out how to make spaces where teams are not drowning in work. My God. So one of them, and I'll mention, I feel like we covered it already, but it's like how gritty innovators do more with less. So that's one workshop that I know we just talked about. You want to add anything to it?
Yeah, so I think the thing about gritty innovation, it's really the frugal innovation or the Jugaad innovation. It's sort of like, I'll give you an example. When I go and talk to a multi-billion-dollar technology organization, and we're talking about frugal innovation, or a lot of them right now are talking about they're growing, and so they're becoming these organizations that now have to spend less and spend in a different way than they used to, right? So it's not sort of like anything goes. We talk about this aspect of gritty innovation, kind of like a startup, right? It's like the fun, the spirit of a bootstrap startup. And then we share, what does that look like from a mindset perspective? What does that look like from a process perspective? How do we actually do that? So there's a keynote that describes it and shares the inspiring stories. And if you, you want to see what it looks like to have less, I will show you. We went there and I will just demonstrate exactly what it looks like and how people solve those problems. But in the environment you're in, that doesn't mean that you don't feel like you're strapped, right? Because it might be different than how you had to operate before. So the keynote is like the inspiration and the idea that, yes, we can operate with this different mindset, and constraints can actually be a catalyst for innovation. That's one container. The second then, of course, is the workshops that go with it. They could be a half day or a day. Sometimes we do 2 days, about a month apart, with a coaching session in between, where we're like, okay, Bring us your real business problem that you're trying to crack, and we're going to take this lens of greedy innovation, Jugaad innovation, intrapreneurship. We're going to apply it in real time, and we're going to help you crack that problem so you can actually move it forward in a different way.
I love that.
One thing, and we always like to make it micro. You know, we've been talking about simplifying, and I think one of the things that we really emphasize is like the micro learning journey. The micro learning journey is, how do you make the really big things small so that you can start making progress right away, so that you can take actions that will help you learn and you can kind of adjust accordingly. And if there's one more thing, Ingrid, that I would add to that, it is that we have a workshop that's the same. It's sort of like how AI creates agency so that your gritty innovators can solve your organization's biggest and baddest problems, or the small problems, and really love operating with that scarcity, because AI sometimes feels so overwhelming. We again take it and make it really small and show people in real time, how do you apply that to problems you're working with right now in a way that works for your organization.
And I'm sure you've seen this, but it always works when somebody outside of your organization comes in and creates those spaces for you, or takes you to another space where it's outside of your day-to-day.
Yeah.
Because I think the only way, to be honest, what I'm seeing that you can simplify is either a newer person that just came in and can see how complex things are and start to point it out, or literally an external consultant that comes in and says, whoa, like this is how.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. I think you have to, it's very, very difficult. It's much easier for somebody from the outside to come in and share their external lens and share that, okay, listen, we have worked with organizations across sectors and some that look just like yours. Here's what hasn't worked, but here's the social proof of what actually can work. And that is your job then, is to help advance the ideas of, maybe it's a certain leader, or maybe it's a group of managers, or just bolster the personal leaders and give them what they need. But it's really helpful to come in, I think, with that outside lens. Yeah. I totally agree, Ingrid.
And then I'm going to mention one more that you have on DEI. I mean, much of our work is in DEI, but I want you to talk a little bit more about your workshop on diversity, equity, and inclusion as a catalyst for innovation.
You know, that was such an interesting keynote for me to develop over the last few years. It's been, because it's all based on ongoing research. So I had that keynote, I think I've had that for 5 or 6 years. And it's really about the case for DEI. And, the transition I had to go through in my own mind is moving from DEI as the moral imperative, which is my belief, to how do we introduce the business case of DEI, which, it was a bit of a challenge. But what I understand is it opens people's ears and it accelerates their journeys so that they're more willing to be open to new voices, new experiences, new backgrounds, who are going to come at problem solving from a different direction. So that keynote is all about very specific, there's stories in there of, organizations we worked with. For example, very quickly, government organization we were working with, they were trying to address food deserts. We had a bunch of people from the Midwest, and we have one person from Nigeria. The solutions they came up with were very different. One, in fact, was, mostly the people in the Midwest were saying, we have to build this infrastructure, build it here, build it here, build it here, build it here. The person from Nigeria said, why don't we try a hub and spoke model? So we have one central organization, one central body of infrastructure, and then we have people who deliver, or it's a bicycle system, or it's a car, whatever it is, but it's a lot less capital intensive, and that is the value of diversity. So we share stories like that, plus the business case, right? So it's the amount of revenue attached to innovation in organizations who have more board diversity, or more women and people of color in leadership positions. It's very well documented. So it's sort of like the facts. It's the stories that are fun and interesting. And then I think it's also the frameworks, some of the frameworks around conflict resolution, because if you can't talk about the hard things together, especially when there are cultural differences, and I don't mean I grew up in India and you grew up in Jamaica, or you grew up in the US, I mean, more just nuanced cultural differences or just beliefs. If you can't do that, you're not going to have a lot of innovation. So that is a fundamental piece of the DEI as a catalyst for innovation.
Mm. And I love that angle because that is the angle. That is why we need DI so badly, because we need people that challenge ideas and bring in new perspectives and have different walks of lives that can bring in just more insight into
100%.
what the solutions need to look like. So, Simone, I could go on with you. I enjoyed so much
Me
this. I
too.
mean, we're at 40 minutes now. I could
My
just
belly
time
kind of
go
fast.
by. Yeah, I just so enjoy I mean, I enjoy learning. I want to obviously continue learning more from you and your journey and what you do. And I'm excited to book you with my speakers and just explore that whole other part of your work. And any last words that you feel like you didn't say
No,
that you
I
want
think
to say?
we covered a lot. Thank you, Ingrid. It's always fun to talk with you. If anyone wants a resource for making things simple, they could go to my website,
Yeah,
simoneahuja.com,
I know.
and download this thing that's called an Entrepreneur's Code Action Plan. And it's just a PDF that's interactive, and you can just take a look at what we do there and then call Ingrid and learn more from her. She can share more as well. But otherwise, that's about it. Thank you so much, Ingrid.
Thank you, Simone. Thank you.